Hello everybody, Dokkan Assets here. Today we are back with another animation analysis video, and today we're going to be taking a look at one of my favorite units in Dokkan, and he just so happens to be getting a EZA very soon. We're taking a look at AGL Dokkan Fest Bardock today. This guy, funny enough, has actually had the data download for his EZA there for kind of a fat minute now, and he still doesn't have it. It's still in a couple of days after the time of uploading this video, right? As you can see, March 12th. So this video is still even going up a couple days early, all things considered, which is kind of funny. But not only is Bardock my personal favorite Dragon Ball character, but since he's getting an EZA, I figured this would be a good time. And of course, I'm sure you were probably wondering if I was going to mention it. I feel like I should, you know, in some capacity in this video. Obviously, with the passing of Akira Toriyama, I wanted to do some kind of tribute thing, and I may still do something more, right? I'm kind of trying to think if I want to do some bigger projects, so maybe that will happen. Keep an eye out if I do that, because that would be something that, you know, I would kind of want to plan out a little bit more rather than just an impromptu thing. But I know a lot of people have been doing things, you know, in light of the passing of Akira Toriyama to honor his memory, talking about their favorite Dragon Ball characters. So this just kind of lined up well with my boy getting an EZA and obviously everything going on in terms of the tributes, right? So, of course, rest in peace, Akira Toriyama. Thank you so much for bringing us all of these fantastic characters and the fantastic worlds that you have created. With that being said, with AGL Bardock, right, before we get into the animations, we do have a Dokkan and anime comparison, actually two different ones, that we are going to actually use both in today's video, because there's a couple of interesting things in both of the people who used, or who made these comparison videos, rather, that kind of had different things that they used to show as the reference, and I think it's interesting enough to include in the video. So we're going to use both to an extent, and this one also has, I know a lot of people when I re-uploaded this animation were excited for me to talk about Tech Raditz, which is really funny. So we will be talking about Tech Raditz. However, as per usual when it comes to these older Dokkan Fest units, right, you guys know that I like to kind of take a look at the date that they came out to kind of gauge a little bit in terms of what we're going to be looking at with the quality of the animations. Obviously, this guy came out on March 18th, oh, 2 days after my birthday, on both versions. Of course, this guy was a Saiyan Day unit in 2020. It will be interesting to see if we do get another Bardock in the future from this particular special, right? I know a lot of people are actually speculating that this Saiyan Day could indeed be a new Super Saiyan Bardock, so it would be interesting if, you know, doing this video, then we take a look at these animations and see how they could improve on it, if he is going to be the Saiyan Day unit. But with that being said, obviously you guys know that my kind of standard thing that I like to do is I always consider this guy the kind of first instance of what we like to call the quote-unquote modern animations, which was in April of 2018 on JP. So I always kind of use that as a comparison, and then, you know, going forward, right, obviously what year after that was the unit that we're going to be taking a look at in terms of these older units, right? So we obviously have maybe more like 2.5-ish, right, kind of years after, or I'm sorry, 1.5 rather after. I think that's how that math adds up. You could correct me in the comments on that one, but regardless though, we're taking a look at a 2020 unit today. Now, I wasn't gonna look at him, to be honest, but a bunch of the comments were hyping up Raditz in the re-upload of these animations that I did on the Dokkan Assets channel, so I figured why not. It's a quick essay, we won't spend too much time on it, but we will watch through Raditz's animations as well. Now, as per usual, we're going to watch through this one time through, and then we will go through the analysis more in depth. And as per usual, I always like to give the precursor that I am by no means an animation professional or an animator or anything like that. I just look at these funny Dokkan animations pretty frequently and obviously look at the PNGs that make them up, so I have a pretty good idea of what makes a good Dokkan animation. Now, I'm going to be honest, Bardock's animations, right, they have obviously aged, right? There's definitely some places where you can see that the animation looks a little bit old, or there's some things that if these were obviously made in the modern day, they would definitely be improved upon a little bit. But I gotta say, for the most part, I feel like they hold up pretty decently so. There's a bunch of different instances in here where there's some animation techniques that they use that I really, really like. And that they do a very good job of kind of keeping this unit a little bit more relevant in the animation department in the current year, which is really, really cool. I was impressed by these even when they came out, and that's outside of the fact that I'm a huge Bardock fan. So let's get into Raditz real quick. I kind of forgot that Tech Raditz came out with Bardock. Such a weird, like, combo, but I guess it is his son, right? So we have the initial shot of Raditz standing here. I always thought that this was a pretty good piece of Raditz art, right? It is interesting, I will say. The one thing is that they don't, like, detail his hair, so it kind of just looks like a black void behind his head, right? They give a little bit of shading there, but then it's just all black. And I know I've seen, like, different interpretations of Raditz's hair, and especially some that look like this, but I think it's just kind of, like, weird looking. I don't know. I'm almost expecting like his hair to then like change into a galaxy behind him or something. Regardless though, with a little bit of zoom in on Raditz, they have him teleport away, which I think is pretty cool, right? That's a good way to have a big high quality piece of art in there, and then you'll not really need to animate it, but obviously then just kind of use it as an introduction piece, right? I like the little blur effect. It feels a lot more, you know, Dragon Ball, early Dragon Ball Z-esque, rather than like the teleports of later Dragon Ball Z, right? So we have him go right in front, and obviously again, because this is such a old unit, right, coming out in 2020, it's clear that obviously these kind of stinky sprite moments almost, where they basically use the equivalent of the sprites, could definitely be improved upon in the modern day. And I think if this guy was probably remade for today, they wouldn't use obviously just like 2 or 3 PNGs to represent this. They'd actually have a little bit of model rigging, right, with you know, just a smaller version of the character model maybe, but obviously it wouldn't just be 4 PNGs, you know, changing in the middle of the, you know, like pose change. Rather, they'd have a little bit of movement on all of them, and they'd probably look a little bit more high quality as well. Right, we move on to this section, which I always thought was actually pretty decent, right? Of course, I think if this was remade today, you maybe wouldn't have a little bit of that, like, fading that you have, right? Because obviously, for the arm, right, they don't really have his hand actually closed. It just fades in between the arm asset, right? And you can also see that the arm is just one piece, right? If you're... Oh, One Piece reference? If you see, right, obviously the arm as it moves around, it's all just one PNG that's connected. Even here, you can kind of see it slide up and down in the actual shoulder pad, which is really interesting. By the way, they do have shading on Raditz's hair here, which is good. Also, hydrate or dihydrate, ladies and gentlemen. Sorry if my voice sounds funny, by the way. I literally just woke up like 15 minutes ago. Regardless, though, right, we obviously have it then do one more pose change with the ghosting. Bro is using Ultra Instinct right now. Right, with obviously his arm being thrown back. And then we have this pretty cool pose for Raditz here, right, obviously with his arm extended. And I believe this is when, yeah, it transitions into the card art. And then I actually really like this card art. I think it looks pretty good. Then we have, again, another, you know, pose change with the fade, right? Again, since this guy is so old and he is a side banner unit, it's kind of unsurprising that it looks like this. This also just looks, like, incredibly messy. Like, I know that, obviously, when it comes down to it, right, you know, it's a little bit harder to see because, obviously, in full motion, right, you're not going to be noticing it as much, but if you go back and watch these animations after watching this video, I promise you, you'll see the fade. This is a pretty cool pose for Raditz, though. Obviously, the little effect is kind of interesting because they have it, like, down here, even though Raditz's hand isn't there. And then, obviously, as he tosses it up, it's kind of, like, by his elbow, which, like, I understand it's because he, you know, moved his arm kind of, like, past the attack and let it go. but I still feel like it doesn't really make sense in the position it's in, but obviously, like, it'd be a little bit weird to put it behind it, so it all happens so quickly that I think it works fine, right, for what it is. And we then have a pretty cool angle, actually, obviously being at the top of the attack before it explodes. And of course, this is another basically like just HD sprite that is looking at the explosion. I do like that they include the background, though, with the Saiyan pod there. That is pretty cool. But yeah, I think it's okay for the time that it came out, right? It is definitely nothing crazy. And I mean, even like when I took a look at Fizz Raditz, you know, the GOAT of Dokkan, when his animations came out, right? Obviously, they were much better than this. But of course, you know, for the time, I think it's okay. Let's take a look at this guy, because actually DBZ Monkey, which of course I'll leave a link to both of these videos in the description below. He also was doing the Team Bardock unit at the time that he uploaded this video, it seems. But we do have the comparison to the anime version of this, so I do want to just look at that real quick because, you know, we have it, right? Very interesting to see, too, you know, the difference in, obviously, like, how the anime animated it, and how Dokkan animated it, considering the time period, right? I think it's pretty clear that if this was remade, you know, as, like, a modern unit for this particular animation, there would be a lot more animation going on, considering how animated, you know, Raditz is, and even just these small little sections that are present in this animation. Even the part in the beginning, right, where Raditz just pulls up, right? And, you know, it's just like the PNG of him in the Dokkan version, right? Obviously, he's walking in this scene, right? So, it would be interesting to see if they actually did a remake of this. That's why I'm always kind of, like, a little bit disappointed when EZAs of units don't necessarily revamp the animations. Like, I know that that kind of, from a money standpoint, doesn't really make sense for Dokkan, because obviously, right, they want to be making money off of new animations, and if they're updating a character that everybody already has, it's not really going to be making them big bucks like that. You know, unless an animation like really needs a revamp for some reason. But man, I just kind of wish that there was something like that. I think that that would be so cool. Maybe with Super EZAs, but I kind of doubt it because it just doesn't really make sense. We did still get, though, those two with, like, Majin Vegeta and LR Gohan, and then they never did it again. I don't know why. But yeah, even this section, right, with obviously the, like, flurry of attacks from Raditz here, obviously you can see how small they make this with the Dokkan sprites, right? And obviously how close up this is in the anime with all these amazing, like, impact frames and stuff like that, the anime-esque background, right? I think if they remade this SA, they could definitely make it a lot cooler than it already is, right? But still, even so, right, I still think they do a good job representing the original source material well enough to the point where, you know, it's a good, you know, it's a good job, I think. It's also interesting, too, I will say, that the color here is, like, clearly pink for this attack, and it's not as much of, like, a spear type of thing. It seems like more of just like an orb that he throws. So that is interesting that they kind of like change that a little bit in Dokkan, right? It still kind of has that thing of like the streak line there, as you can see, but just kind of interesting to point out, right? Also, I just realized I misspelled anime up there. I always misspell things because whenever I'm typing, I just smash my head into a keyboard and then hope it comes out correctly and wait for autocorrect to fix it. It's kind of a bad habit, to be honest with you. Anyway, let's move on to the actual man of the hour. We're taking a look at AGL Bardock. So, this guy's animations are obviously really, really cool. I always really, really like these, of course. The scene where the enemies are attacking the village that Bardock is staying at after he gets sent back to the past. And I always like this little establishing shot. I always thought that this was really, really cool, right? Obviously him standing on the rock, and then they pan up and show the big bad man standing there. Very, very cool. Obviously teleporting away. I love the camera work here where it basically pans up to then, you know, the implication that Bardock was up in the sky, right, with the camera moving up like that. I think that's really cool as he obviously comes down from the top flying in. I really, really like that a lot. Obviously that quick pose change there, right, but again, this is a 2020 unit. And we have Bardock obviously ready up with the attack there, right, before it transitions. That's a very interesting transition, I will say, because obviously he's really, really far away from the enemy here. You know, like not even close to him, because obviously the implication of the camera was that it panned up super high, and then they basically just do a white fade to bam, him already getting hit. I always prefer like a fading transition like this, because I think a lot of the time it works a lot better than a jump cut. And I think in this case, probably the fade is better, just because then it's like, oh, you know, during that time he flew down, right? I don't even know if the like creators of this essay, you know, on the Dokkan team are even like thinking about it that deeply, but you know, it is there. So we do have that little effect, right? Obviously pretty cool. And then of course we get this little section where Bardock does the beatdown. I will say all of these spins in this animation I really like. Let's go back to the spin that Bardock does here. This is part of the thing that like really makes me like this animation. By the way, I always did think that Bardock's pose here looked a little bit awkward. It kind of looks like when you're posing your action figures when you're a kid. But yeah, obviously the teleport away to here, right? First of all, I love how they have Bardock teleport in. That's really cool that it's kind of like, you know, up off the ground and then getting into position, right? But yeah, having him move super quickly like that, right? Obviously having the blur on him and using a little bit of stretching, right? Because you can see they kind of extend his body a little bit. That is really cool, because obviously kind of, you know, emphasizes the spin. And then obviously you get to this pose where Bardock's legs are a little bit back, and then of course winding him up to kick the enemy away. I always thought that that shot honestly looked really good. And then you have this moment where Bardock clutches his fist, which is really cool. Obviously, again, because this is a little bit older, you kind of just have this asset expanding a little bit, right? It's just growing bigger to represent Bardock's hand going like, you know, and like obviously clutching his fist like that. But I think it works, right? Obviously, especially for a 2020 animation, I think it looks good. So this part is really interesting. We have a very cool little like effect here, right, to obviously kind of imply that Bardock is yelling. This is very funny though, I will say. There is so much wrong with this frame. So for one, the anime effects of the like speed lines at the top do not meet with the top of the screen. That is remedied like just about immediately after like one frame. But it is kind of funny that it's there. Bardock's hand is also layered twice, right? You can see his fingers are there twice on the left side, as well as his like handcuffs, right? Whatever you call those things, the like red arm gauntlets, bracelets, whatever that he's wearing, right? Also the bandana, like in every other shot, looks super detailed, and here it kind of just looks like paint on his face. That's not as big of a deal though. And the other thing that's definitely not as big of a deal, but still kind of looks a little awkward, is like, I swear his chest there looks like so blocky compared to like in other shots when the armor feels a little bit more rounded. Regardless though, very funny look. And I just noticed, is his hair layered as well? His hair is layered as well, because look, there's like 2 strands of hair for those in-between shots. Huh. Oh my gosh, it gets even worse. Is that what they use for the... Oh, see, I was going to point out in a second, like, this little effect that they have for the, you know, kind of like the fading, like, moving fast screaming effect here, right? With, you know, Frieza! Even though obviously he's not fighting Frieza. But that is interesting. I guess maybe at the time, I would assume it would just be that they didn't know how to do this effect as well yet, because in later Dokkan animations, they absolutely nail this effect, right? With this kind of like fading screaming thing, because there's been some animations that we've seen in modern time that do this really well. So maybe they just like had to have the asset there in the beginning. I'm not really sure. Maybe they just didn't realize that it was like visible there, but that is really interesting, because obviously then, you know, that becomes kind of like the faded Bardock asset, because then it becomes normal in a second, right? Like, you can see it grow as we look through these frames. That is really interesting. Definitely very cool. Yeah, so we kind of have this little bit of the fade as Bardock turns around for a little bit of like almost pseudo rotoscoping, even though it's kind of not really. It's more just like, you know, he's turning around to face the enemy. And you then change it to this angle, which is a little bit interesting, I will say, because the one thing I wanted to mention about this before we move on from it is that it's only like the top half of the pink right, for the sky that is visible in this section. And keep an eye on like the shape of the clouds up there, right, to see then when we transition on the zoom in, right, it is the same shape of the clouds up in the sky, right, but now they just show the ground, right, and they show the buildings in the background. That is a really interesting way of changing the perspective while kind of tricking the audience into thinking that like the camera is turning around, even though realistically the background is not changing whatsoever. It's just now that more of it is in frame, and it's kind of, you know, tricking your eyes into thinking like, oh, you know, the whole camera turned around, when realistically they just turned the Bardock asset. Honestly, that is really, really cool. I like that a lot. I like going back and looking at these older Dokkan animations and seeing these little things that they kind of did to sort of like mask what they could or couldn't do at the time. I think it's really interesting. This shot is really cool. Obviously, we have this awesome dynamic angle of Bardock where the hand is a lot more closer to the camera. Every time I think of the hand, my buddy just watched JoJo recently. I can't help but think of my goat Okuyasu. But anyway, this is a cool angle. I love the way that they do this, and there is a little bit of minimal movement there, right, that looks really, really good on Bardock's arms, right? Obviously, the big fist. Here comes the giant fist, you know, is kind of raising up, and Bardock's hand in the front is lowering down a little bit as it obviously approaches towards the enemy, right? We do have, again, a little bit of a fade of white. It's kind of interesting because for this one, they don't like fade completely, right? Obviously, it's still a little visible, and then they cut to this shot. By the way, for some reason, Bardock's face in this particular shot just looks like so good to me. I can't describe why, but I swear it looks like just, it's one of the best like faces that I think he has in this animation. But anyway, yeah, zooming into said face, which thank you for giving me more of that, we have another fade, right, where obviously instead of kind of, you know, animating the arm moving up like that, right, they have Bardock swing up with the fade. It's also kind of interesting too, I will say, because the implication of this, right, is that obviously Bardock's, what would that be, right arm, right? His right arm is the one that's going to do the attack, and the left arm is kind of the one that's in like the pose, right? And then obviously here you can see the left arm is clenched and the right arm is at the bottom, right? I always was thinking that the implication of this was that the left arm was supposed to do the attack, but then as you can see, the left arm just kind of becomes, you know, it's just kind of sitting there while the right arm does the uppercut. Now, it does make sense that the right arm does the uppercut because obviously it's the one that's lower down there. But it's kind of weird because the whole time you were thinking that the other fist was going to be the one to attack. Regardless, though, we then have, again, this kind of like, you know, phasing sort of effect, which I think if obviously they, I know I sound like a broken record, I swear I do this every time we look at an old animation, but if they did remake this for the modern day, which is, you know, partially the point of looking at these older essays, right, I think that they definitely wouldn't have that in there, obviously. I do like Bardock's expression here. It's very extreme. It kind of reminds me of another Bardock unit. I swear there's a Great Ape unit that has like a similar face to this. Maybe it even is Tech Great Ape Bardock. But regardless, though, yeah, obviously with the punch up, right, very, very cool. And I like the sort of like wind that is kicked up almost. Like obviously the like hit effect is supposed to be there to represent like the bonk on the enemy, which is kind of interesting because like it feels like it's kind of out of nowhere. But this is also another one where it's like a first person POV. You are the enemy getting hit by the enemy. So it's kind of interesting that obviously the effect is almost like on you, the cameraman. I kind of like that, honestly. They also continue the effect afterward, as you can see. Also, another certified stinky sprite moment here, because obviously you kind of get a face full of it. And the proportions between the enemy and Bardock here definitely look a little weird. Also, you can see that at the top right corner there, too, they also don't have the line effects reach all the way to the corner. That's kind of interesting. But yeah, obviously knocking the enemy away here, right? Then, of course, having the lines kind of come off of Bardock, which is pretty cool, right? To then end the animation. So let's take a look at this from DBZ Monkey and from JiodZ. So it's kind of interesting because they both do a little bit of a different thing here for this. With JiodZ, that one we're going to look at first. I was kind of trying to decide which one I wanted to look at initially. So, obviously, right, we have him fly in, right, which again, right, you can kind of tell that once again this is sort of another case where I do feel like if this was remade, there's a bunch of things and certain like angles in this then you could see that they probably would have changed or made a little bit more close up, right, when it comes down to it. It is really interesting, right? Like with the smoke effects as Bardock is coming down from the sky, some of the angles. And this was the shot that I definitely wanted to include in here from the DBZ Monkey version of this video, right? It's kind of interesting because obviously this shot just shows Bardock's hand, but they also use this shot for his face and kind of combine it together, which I think is really interesting that, you know, taking those two references and sort of making them one thing. Yeah, I would be really interested to see in the future, right, if they did remake these, right, how they would kind of redo some of these, because I think like a big part of it right here would be this section where he kind of comes through the like smoke like this, right? I definitely think that that could look really cool if they did something more with that, if they remade part of this animation. I think that would be awesome, because obviously Bardock like pushing through the smoke, right, and then coming down to attack is super cool, right? And I would definitely love to see more of that. Yeah, like even these, right, you can see that obviously the angle is a little bit different, like for this kick, right? Obviously Bardock flying in, it's a lot more closer to the camera. They still do a good job of referencing the original material for this, right, for sure. It's not like, you know, it's off by any means, but, you know, obviously the angles are just a little bit more dynamic in the anime version, right? Especially this one, dude. I would love if they did a close-up of this in a remade version of this essay. But yeah, definitely very, very interesting to see some of the comparisons that they did. But in terms of, like, you know, making you feel like you're, you know, experiencing something from the anime and making as much reference to it as they could, I think they did a good job for 2020 for sure. All right, so now we move on to one of my favorite animations from this, besides, of course, the super attack, the transformation into Super Saiyan. So this is really, really cool, right? We have Bardock looking at his hand first and foremost, before obviously looking at the ground with the electricity sparking everywhere, right? With then the little cut in. I love all the rocks everywhere. The Super Saiyan hair, I definitely think that, again, if this was a modern version of this, I really like the way that obviously the black hair flutters up. The only thing I don't like about this is that it just like, bam, one frame turns into Super Saiyan hair, right? I wish there was a little bit more of a transition on the lighting when it goes from this to this, right? I like that they did their best with this and they still had all of the pieces of the hair kind of moving, right? In, you know, coordinates with him like kind of tapping in and out of Super Saiyan. But I do wish that it wasn't just like, you know, one PNG to the next of the color being there, because obviously when characters kind of flash into Super Saiyan like that, it's more of like, ironically enough, usually I don't like the fades, but obviously this is a little bit of a different case, because obviously it's not just fading in between the poses of a character, right? Their entire hair, the yellow color is like, you know, phasing in and out of their hair. So regardless though, I do like they kind of have this like yellow effect to have the transition be there, because they obviously don't actually show him going Super Saiyan right there, right? But I think that's a good way to do it. And I always really liked this shot. Even back in the day when I was doing those asset rebuild videos, I remade these, or this particular shot right here. I love the little dust cloud part, right? Obviously you have Bardock stanced up, super angry, and I love the aura on this. They absolutely nailed it, right, with the kind of like ball around him basically before, right, obviously having him scream to the heavens, which looks awesome. I love the way that the ground breaks, right? Every shot in this looks so cool. The aura looks amazing, right? Obviously spiking up. I love these little lines here, right? And then obviously transitioning into this fantastic shot here of Bardock with the electricity sparking, the aura zooming in on him. Dude, it's such a nice shot. Holy cow. They cooked for sure. So I will say what's really interesting about this is that if we look at, we're actually going to look at DBZ Monkey's version for this first. So what's interesting about this part is that obviously when it comes to you know, the transformation, right? See, that's what I'm talking about there, right? You can see that the hair is kind of fading in and out, right? Rather than just one solid PNG, you know, kind of just changing like that. it's interesting because DBZ Monkey, right, is like, oh yeah, it looks like original Super Saiyan, which I didn't even like clock that in, right? This part right here, right, when they pan, kind of looks like when Goku first went Super Saiyan on Namek. But what's interesting is that when JiodZ does it, right, if we look at the comparison from his end here, it's really interesting because it's the fighters one, right, which obviously is pretty clear that this is what it is, right, because obviously it's like almost 1-for-1 same angle, right. But I guess this must be like then that fighters reference that scene from, you know, Dragon Ball Z when Goku went Super Saiyan, like, surely, right? Just thought that was kind of interesting that it's sort of like a dual reference there. I actually really like that. In regards to the rest of it, though, I think, again, this is another case of, like, they did a really good job for what they had at the time, right? Obviously, Bardock opening and closing his hand. It is interesting that this angle is, like, kind of cocked to the side. But honestly, I think for Dokkan's case, it's a good thing that they did it like this, because obviously, since you're looking at the phone vertically, this actually works really well for kind of changing the angle, right? Obviously, when they're making these Dokkan animations, they have to take into consideration that they're not having a wide screen to work with, right? Obviously, the game is not being displayed in landscape mode, it's being displayed in portrait mode, right? Up and down rather than side to side. So that is definitely some very cool attention to detail that they decided to change that shot, right, from this angle to up and down to kind of fit better with the platform that the animation is going to be shown on. That is really cool. Yeah, so it is interesting too, I will say. They're not as zoomed into Bardock for this entire section. Again, maybe that's just because when it comes to a lot of these Dokkan animations and they're super zoomed in the anime, right? Especially, again, kind of talking about that landscape sort of thing. They really like to show you more of the scene in Dokkan because obviously they have the opportunity to show you more of like the up and down version of the shot rather than the side to side. And I do like that in some cases, but sometimes I still wish they would kind of pull the camera in a little bit. And I think this is one of those cases because it sort of makes Bardock look a little bit awkward in the pose, just a little bit. It's not like the worst thing ever, for sure. But it still looks very cool, and it's interesting to see, right? You can see, obviously, of course, with the anime version, having the hair kind of fade in and out with the yellow kind of fading in, right? It is interesting that they sort of try and do that, because obviously they do have the hair just change immediately on the Dokkan one, but it is a little bit darker on the yellow initially, and then it kind of goes to this little bit more of a golden color there, you know, before it goes darker again, and obviously they just kind of pop back to the base form hair. I never even really noticed that before, but that is pretty cool attention to detail. But yeah, obviously, again, right, for this shot in the anime version, they transition from here to here. And it's interesting because obviously Dokkan just kind of keeps the same shot and raises his head up, which I always thought that looked a little bit awkward, to be honest. If anything looks awkward in here, it's that instant change of his head, right? And then obviously just kind of having it lean back. By the way, I never really noticed that as the yellow light kind of comes up to his eyes on the anime, that's when the green eyes appear for Super Saiyan. That is pretty cool. But anyway, so yeah, obviously for the anime one, they kind of have the zoom in, right, where they then have him spin a little bit. And I always like this little spin shot here with this kind of like, you know, transitional background that they have before then getting to the shot of him in the rocks. So it's interesting that, again, for the Dokkan one, they just kind of cut to him on the ground rather than having that transition scene. Again, I think if these got remade, that would definitely be included in here. But it is cool to see that they did pretty much nail this like ball aura kind of look here, right? They did a very good job with it for sure. And obviously when it comes to the explosion, right, of anger, they definitely did a very good job with that as well. Even in the Dokkan version, right, obviously the aura is a little bit more spiky than it is in the anime, which I think is really interesting. The anime definitely has a lot more like breaking of the ground, which is kind of another interesting thing to note there too. But yeah, this shot definitely looks really, really good. I like this a lot. I do wonder, it would be interesting to see a comparison if, you know, this does get remade, if they'll have more of the ground break. I wonder if they did that intentionally, or if it's just like they didn't have time, or they just felt like it didn't fit for the mobile game screen, having that many like cracks in the ground. Kind of interesting, because usually Dokkan is almost like bar for bar when it comes to that sort of thing. So I think it's just interesting to note. It's not a bad thing by any means, but just something interesting to point out. Alright, so we now move on to the final animation here. Of course, we now have Bardock's super attack animation when he defeats Chill. This is an awesome scene. First of all, the aura in this entire first section is like so peak, man. First of all, you have Bardock, you know, super angry, obviously, with his arms towards his face because, of course, you know, he's kind of getting ready to throw them down to power up. And I love this little bit in the beginning that you barely even see because, obviously, the black is fading away. But you have these little rings here, right? Before it then has the aura form at his feet to then blast upward, right? I like that they add the little lines as well. That's a super cool touch. And the actual change in Bardock's coloring, right? You can see like here it's obviously a little bit darker. And the way that those brights really shine and the highlights on his armor look fantastic from the aura, right? Definitely very, very good job on the lighting for sure. Right? Obviously then having him teleport away, and we have the spin. Now, I always really like this shot. First of all, I always thought that that looked super good, but this shot right here is not only just so funny looking, but it's really well animated, actually, I will say, for the time, right? Like, I think they have just enough frames to really make your brain go, oh yeah, Bardock is definitely spinning there. It's kind of funny that he has his arms crossed. I never noticed that before. But yeah, I think the spin looks really good, and as well the way that they drew the aura for this also really emphasizes him kind of moving in the direction that he's going. And I like the transition to this, right? Obviously having his arms open up, and then bam, they adjust to a higher quality asset right here, which I think is perfect because that's the moment that you would be blinking basically from the attack hitting the screen, right? And it's happening so fast that you don't even really notice that these particular assets look a little bit weird, right, in terms of the quality and like how dark they are with the, you know, like thick outlines. So pretty good job in the transition there. Obviously that then leads into Chilled flying away, and we have Bardock teleport in with the aura there, right? This is just a PNG, right, of Bardock kind of sitting in the sky. However, I think that because this guy has an aura, it does a lot to bring this animation to life, even though it is a little bit older with some of these PNGs being here, because a lot of the time your eyes are kind of focusing on the aura, right, and the movement of that, rather than the character not really moving much. But obviously we have Bardock then kick out, and I think in terms of just a quick like snappy pose change, this works perfectly because obviously the kick is supposed to be emphasized by the fact that he's moving quickly, so that is pretty cool. You have that little blue effect on there, which is definitely a nice little way to emphasize the kick. And it's interesting too because you have Bardock bring his leg back and then back into this position. I don't even know, I will have to watch the anime comparison, but like it's kind of funny because I just thought that he wasn't like spinning his leg. I thought that he was just kicking it out, but I suppose it must be a little bit of a spin. Also, oh, okay, I thought his armor plate moved there, but I was being tripped up by the, like, little neum effect on the end of it. Yeah, because then obviously it spins around. He teleports away again, which looks really good. And then, of course, you have this. Now, this is the only unfortunate thing, right? Again, this is another certified Stinky Sprite moment. Obviously, this animation works perfectly for Chilled, right, with grabbing his feet, right? It even so kind of looks like he's actually grabbing his legs there in this shot. And I like that they kind of have this establishing shot here, too, rather than just cutting to this shot right here. I like that they have that introductory scene. However, the unfortunate circumstance about this one is that obviously, because, again, certified Stinky Sprite moment, this one will also look a little bit weird always because it can't really be in Bardock's hands, and it will always just kind of be like the sprite under it, right, as he's whipping them around like this. So I'm glad that they included this because it is one of my favorite scenes, but it is just kind of unfortunate because of how Dokkan sprites work that will look a little bit jank, especially with different size characters, right? We always talk about when we talk about the Stinky Sprites that, like, you know, sometimes when it comes to characters who are a little bit more bigger than average, right? You know, we're talking like Cell Max Harudagon, or even on the other end, characters like Chaozu who are really small. It will probably look a little bit weird. But yeah, obviously Bardock spinning the enemy around. I always thought that this looked so good. And they do a really good job, I will say, of incorporating the Stinky Sprite into this, right? By having the Sprite change into the different positions that they obviously have it, like, in-game, right? Also, by the way, Bardock's aura looks incredible here. They did such a good job of animating this to really feel like it's spinning in a circular motion. Yeah, it's cool to see, right? Because obviously you have this one where it's like the enemy getting hit in like the punching section, right? If you're doing like a normal attack. And then this is obviously like the enemy getting hit against the KO screen. Like Bardock isn't even holding them there. That's where we're talking Stinky Sprite moment right there. But again, right, it's just because it's moving so fast so you don't even really notice it. And they then transition into, you know, basically just the asset of Chilled getting hit and then the one of him plapping against the KO screen, right? But I do like this when they have this spin. Not only do they emphasize it by the air and dust kicking up, right, against the ground, I really like that they have this, right? They turn my boy Bardock into the Tasmanian Devil. It's so funny to look at out of context. But obviously in the animation, this is so cool. Because obviously this is a technique the animators use sometimes to kind of like emphasize movement. Where obviously if you pause it, it's going to look a little bit funny. But in full motion, it looks really, really good. Because obviously, right, it's supposed to, you know, emphasize how fast the character is moving. Because obviously, right, they're just a complete blur of color, right? All the colors that they have, you know, on them at the time. So that is really, really cool, right? I definitely like that quite a bit. This one, it's interesting. They also do this, which is like a less detailed version of that, right? You can see if we go from that to that, where they still kind of blur it, but it's just like a little yellow circle almost. It kind of looks like a Beyblade, to be honest with you. I mean, Bardock basically is like a Beyblade in this scene, to be honest. But yeah, I always really like that, right? Or they kind of have the little bit of like the rotation sort of thing there. I don't know how I feel about this. I still kind of wish they would have done some like detail in this little bit of a smaller one, but it is only on screen for like 1 or 2 frames, so I think it works just fine, honestly. It is noticeable, I suppose, if you're really paying attention, but looking at this scene, like, let's actually look at this in full motion just to kind of, you know, get the full experience of Bardock spinning around here, right? Look at how good this looks. Super cool, right? I definitely really, really like that. And they also have that little bit in there, so it really emphasizes how fast he's moving. He's kind of blurring at some points. I really, really like that animation a lot. It's always been one of my favorites in Dokkan, right? As silly as it is, obviously, you know, it's right from the anime, so it makes sense. But once we have Chill get thrown, you have this awesome close-up shot, which, funny enough, I'm pretty sure... First of all, why does Bardock have, like, eyeliner here? Second of all, this looks extremely similar to the face that he makes right here. I think that is the same asset, actually. I don't think it's the same body, right, obviously, but I think the face is definitely the same. They probably use the same head asset for that. But anyway, obviously, we then have a pretty good transition, actually, all things considered, from this to this. You know, if this was a modern essay, I would expect definitely more of like a transition on the expression, for sure. But I like this a lot, right? And I think this frame to this frame is pretty good, all things considered, right? The only thing I think is a little trippy there is probably like the shading, right? Because obviously you have the dark on Bardock's hair, but then obviously... you have the little bit of the brighter colors there, but that's also because the aura is kind of coming in the frame as well. But yeah, then you have Bardock turn his head again. I would just expect some more like individual frames for this if this was a modern animation. But I do actually really like the transition here, right? Obviously kind of zooming out on Bardock, then they just cut to him like from the back, basically whipping Chilled forward, right? Obviously then having him be thrown. I think that's a good way to do the perspective. You then have Bardock teleport under him before then teleporting in front of him and kicking him up. I always love that scene from the anime. It's so cool. I'm glad they even included that, because they definitely could have just like not included the part where he flies under him, right? And they definitely could have just then cut to him teleporting and then just kicking Chilled, right? So I really, really like that they bothered to include that, because it's just such an awesome part of it. And then, of course, we get into this. Oh, man, this looks so good, even to this day, I swear. So, talk about a nice minimal movement, bro. Bardock's arm lifting up, right? Obviously, it's still a little bit of a cut, but Bardock's arm moving in this entire sequence here is really, really well done, right? And then kind of coming out to the side, right? Super cool. Even his head kind of like rolling a little bit, right, on his neck there. Super cool. And you have the little bit of the Ki Blast obviously beginning to form in his hand. I love when they did Ki Blast in this era of Dokkan because they never just did like... It's so funny because original Dokkan SAs had just like the circle for the Ki Blast basically. And then later on they did stuff like this where you can see there's a little bit of the multiple colors of like darker blues kind of going in there. And the way that it's animated to grow and shrink makes it feel a lot more like an actual, you know, like energy attack rather than just a funny circle. Transitioning to the card art, one of my favorite card arts in the game as well. We then have obviously Bardock with the close-up. Dude, this shot is so peak right here. Holy cow. We have the zoom in to Bardock's face, right, which looks great, right? I love the aura as well, kind of being in front of the camera in between you and Bardock. That is really, really cool. And you then have it move back, right, to then transition into Bardock beginning to throw the blast, right? I love this section. I think it's pretty well animated. Despite the jump cuts here, I think in full motion it looks pretty good. And I love this angle as well here too, kind of having it be closer to the camera with obviously Bardock whipping his arm back, right? And then using that as a transition. Dude, look at the, oh my gosh, the lineage on his hands like in the energy blast. That is super cool. Definitely very nice attention to detail. I love that angle as well, how like dynamic that looks. It's super cool. You then have Bardock obviously launch the attack, and again the Ki Blast looks great, obviously being a little bit more of an oval with the little like Ki Blast shards almost kind of flying off of it. You have it then fly up to the sky with another little spark of it, right? I really like this angle too. And I will say the one thing that is a little bit weird about this animation is definitely like the blast itself, right? I think Bardock throwing it, right? Again, if it was updated, I think it would be a little bit more fluid, but in full motion, it still looks pretty good. It is a little bit weird on the perspective here, right? Because the blast is not that big, right? All things considered, right? Obviously, you see it in the palm of Bardock's hand here, right? And obviously, it's just kind of like an average size Ki Blast, right? But then they zoom into the camera, and then the implication of this, because the chilled sprite is so small and he gets hit by it like this, right? It's like the implication is that the attack is now like Genki Dama size. And I know it does get a little bit bigger because obviously, right, Bardock is pumping energy into it, which is cool that they, you know, kind of imply that from obviously just fading to the next scene and already having Bardock put energy into it. So it's almost kind of like the implication was that off screen it was getting bigger because Bardock was making it bigger. But I still feel like it's a little bit too big almost for just like what it looks like. Maybe this frame kind of makes it feel a little bit more like the size it should be rather than this one. It's just kind of like the trick of the eyes, right? Playing, you know, your mind on the size of it. But I always thought that it was like, that's a little weird, but it's nothing like too crazy, right? It's not really that noticeable unless you really think about it like that. But I really like this shot here, right? With the dust clouds shooting off, right? Especially this one where it kind of like parts around Bardock. I always thought that was really cool. And obviously you then have him growing the blast by pumping the energy into it, which is awesome. I love this shot here too, where it basically like kind of explodes in the sky after he's throwing the energy into it, right? Very, very cool. The aura looks fantastic there as well. I love this shot of Bardock basically just with his hand up. And then, of course, they transition. It's really interesting the way that they do this as well, because they have the asset for the explosion kind of like spawn in behind the blue ball, which you can see there. But they kind of mask it by having the whole screen turn blue for a second, right? And having that asset fade away before they then have the explosion, which I actually think looks really good in full motion. They definitely did a very, very good job with that. Let's go ahead and take a look at now the comparison for the super attack animation here. Yeah, like, dude, they did such a good job with this. I think that obviously this animation here, I mean, it's clearly his best, right? Like, I think it's no contest in terms of all the animations that he has to work with, right? And here, I will say, I think this is probably the best job that they did in terms of, like, the angle. Oh, yeah, I forgot Chill flies away like that. Whenever I watch it special, I always laugh that he like gets tossed around like that. It's super funny. Yeah. I think that honestly, oh yeah, and this is cool too, right? So, with DBZ Monkey, right, he kind of, where are we in the beginning of this animation here? I'm losing my place. There we go. He is, right, obviously showing this part, right, where he kind of powers up, like this, right? We're kind of using the transformation animation, which definitely could be it, right? It's like just a different angle of the transformation animation, right? And then obviously the spin comes in, but JiodZ does note that for the specific angle, right, obviously, and the kind of like way that it looks with the explosion, it is extremely similar to the Fighters one, right? Like the angle is like quite literally the exact same angle for, you know, the way that they look at it. And it could definitely just be like Fighters is like taking a different angle of the transformation animation as well. But it is interesting to see, right? Regardless though, yeah, like look at this, dude. They do such a good job with the little flip here, right? Even so back then, right, with everything. It is interesting to see as well that this is also an elbow for this attack, right? But then obviously in the Dokkan version, it's kind of more like a punch, even though they sort of put the effect part on his elbow to kind of imply that it's an elbow. But I always thought that that was just a punch, so that's kind of interesting. If they remade that, maybe they would do something to make that more obvious that it's an elbow. This is pretty cool though. Obviously they incorporate a quick base form attack into there for a little bit of an extra kick, right? And then, of course, the section where they grab JiodZ. Oh, man. Yeah, like, look at this, dude. I would even venture to say that, to an extent, the Dokkan version looks a little bit better, almost. But that's obviously just because it's, like, far away anime animation, so they make him seem a little bit more simple. And, funny enough, those little shots of the, you know, Speedy Gonzalez, you know, like, Tasmanian Devil look are referencing the anime directly, right? You can see that the anime obviously has that in there as well. And it's kind of interesting to see, too, obviously, because they can't make the enemy sprite blurred like that. They do it by having the air effects sort of take that place, right? With obviously the little bit of like the spikes coming off of him, rather than it being orange to be chilled, right? I think that that is pretty cool. And again, definitely a very good way to kind of use what you have to your advantage, right? To make something that still references the original source material as good as you can. So yeah, again, right, even so, the anime, I think, you know, probably has a couple more. Well, I don't know, maybe it is about the same amount of frames in the Dokkan version. I think there's maybe a couple more in the anime, but overall, right, very, very similar looking. It's also interesting to see sometimes the anime has the hair look a little bit more, like, darker, and sometimes it doesn't, right? But the Dokkan version seems to stay pretty consistent with it being a little bit more of that gold color. But yeah, we then have obviously JiodZ get whipped forward, right? And then, yeah, they do reference that C, which I really, really appreciate, because I always love this part, because I think it's so cool. I don't think I've ever seen another Dragon Ball character do this, where they fly under the enemy, right? Because obviously most of the time when a character hits someone away, right, and then they teleport to where they're going to be, and then hit them again, right, you never really see it, right? You never really see them move in between the shots. So it's really, really cool to see that they actually have Bardock obviously zoom past, right? And then they have him appear behind JiodZ. Obviously an incredible display of speed on Bardock's part. It's also really interesting to see as well, by the way. I kind of didn't clock in the fact that I just never really realized this before about the unit. His armor is well broken by this point, because when he turns Super Saiyan, his armor is already shattered. So it's interesting that for the Dokkan one, they just kind of keep him in the armor. I don't know if that's just because, like, they weren't thinking about it that deeply, or sometimes when it comes to these little details back then they didn't always have it as down pat, or if it was just they wanted to keep him in the full armor, right, rather than it just being broken. But it would be really cool that if they did do a new version of this guy, obviously then we could get like a battle damage version of the sprite, and then these animations would have him be more battle damage. Excuse me, I don't know if you heard that. But anyway, why am I talking like a country boy? But anyway, we then of course have Bardock kick JiodZ up to the sky, and man, this section is just so well done, bro. Holy cow, look at this, man. Even for 2020, they were straight cooking in these streets, dude. They absolutely killed it, man. Let's take a look at that one more time. They did such a good job with this entire section here, right, of Bardock bringing his hand out to form the Ki Blast, right? Even in the way the Ki Blast forms to an extent, right, where it kind of grows a little bit in his hand on the Dokkan one, you can see that then in the anime it grows in a similar fashion like that. Man, it is so well done, if I do say so myself, right? Then let's actually just look at it in slow-mo so we don't have to keep tapping the button. There we go. Yeah, super well done. Look at that, man. They did such a good job mimicking the anime. Obviously, again, there's always room for improvement, especially with how old these are. But man, I think for what they were doing at the time, they were straight cooking. They still, you know, hold up to an extent to this day. I feel like they definitely did a very good job making these animations as good as they could. And I think they kind of, as we like to say on the Slot 1 Super podcast, they knew the assignment. For sure, right? When it came to making the Super Saiyan Super Attack animation, I think the best one, they definitely knew that that was what they had to do. So definitely very, very cool stuff. I'm really glad, honestly, that they did such a good job with this guy in the animation department. Because, you know, it really sets a precedent for how good a new version of this guy should be. And just, you know, even so, like, looking at this and realizing that this is an animation from 2020 is just so crazy to me, because I would be like thinking back and being like, man, this would like not look that good for being how old it is, and all things considered how far we've come from Dokkan animations. But man, I would still say that they, you know, overall did a very good job with this guy. So I would absolutely love to see a new version of this scene, especially with the modern animation techniques that they have and everything like that. It was really awesome taking a look at this guy, because this has always been one of my favorite units in the game, with obviously Bardock being my favorite Dragon Ball character. So it was really cool to take a look back on this guy's animations here today. I really hope that we do actually get Bardock for Saiyan Day. I think that would be awesome. I know a lot of people are rooting for a bunch of different characters, but that's definitely my personal choice. I also wouldn't mind Z Broly either, but let me know in the comments what you hope that Saiyan Day will be. Let me know if you are hyped for this guy's EZA. I know a lot of people have been discussing it on thefunnytwitter.com. And thank you all so much for watching this video. Of course, if you did enjoy, don't forget to like and subscribe. And, right, obviously, you know I gotta mention it again at the end of the video. Akira Toriyama, thank you so much. Really appreciate everything that you have done for me personally in my life, everything that you've done for the world around you, everything you've done for the world of anime, and all of the lives that you have affected with your amazing work throughout the years. Thank you so much. You will absolutely be missed. Rest in peace.